What if the Christmas you remember from 1970s? America is not the one you actually lived inside. You think of warmth, familiar songs, a calm that felt natural at the time. Yet something in that memory does not quite settle when you slow down and stay with it. Back then, you followed rituals without naming them. You felt expectations without hearing them spoken. It felt like comfort, yet also like a quiet weight that shaped how you moved through the season. You learned early which moments were meant to be joyful and which feelings were meant to stay hidden. If this memory feels close to you, please like and subscribe to support the channel. Now step into the moments where that unspoken feeling first took shape. The feeling of Christmas in 1970s America. I remember stepping outside on a cold December evening and feeling something settle over the street before any lights were turned on. It felt calm and steady and familiar in a way that is hard to explain now. Christmas did not rush toward us. It arrived slowly through shorter days and longer shadows. People moved with less urgency, and that feeling carried into homes and stores and conversations. But that was only part of the story. The calm came from a shared rhythm where work hours and school breaks and television schedules quietly aligned. There was a small confidence in knowing everyone else was preparing at the same pace. Decorations appeared one by one, and music drifted softly through open doors. By today's standards, it might feel understated. Still, the feeling lingered quietly in the background as if waiting for something else to come into view. Christmas shopping and department stores. I can still see the revolving doors of the department store and the warm air rushing out into the cold. Inside, everything moved at a measured pace with long counters and patient lines. Shopping felt like an outing rather than a task. It looked simple, but simplicity was not accidental. Stores were designed to slow people down with displays and shared spaces and familiar clerks. There was a small detail that said everything. Children stood still to watch animated windows while adults talked without checking the time. Credit cards existed, but cash and layaway shaped decisions quietly. Buying gifts meant planning ahead and returning later. The experience stayed with you longer than the purchase itself. As the season went on, the lights seemed brighter, while something beneath it all shifted slowly in the background. The Sears Wish Book and the Art of Waiting. The Sears Wish Book arrived in the mail, and suddenly the house felt different. Pages were turned carefully, and corners folded with intention. This detail explains a lot. Waiting was built into the process because choices had to be made early and hopes held quietly. But this was not the full picture. The catalog worked because delivery took time, and patience became part of the ritual. Children learned to circle items, knowing not everything would arrive. Parents studied prices and availability without saying much. Anticipation stretched across weeks rather than days. There was no instant confirmation, and that uncertainty carried its own weight. The waiting filled the space between Thanksgiving and Christmas without noise. It sat there quietly, shaping expectations as the season moved forward slowly in the background. The living room was the center of the world. I remember the glow of a single television filling the living room on cold December nights, coats hung by the door, boots drying near the heat vent, the house settling into quiet. Back then, the living room was not decoration. It was the place where Christmas happened in real time. Families gathered there because there was nowhere else to go. One screen, one couch, one shared moment that pulled everyone into the same rhythm. It felt simple, but that simplicity came from something very specific. There were fewer channels, fewer distractions, and the sense that if you missed something together, you missed it entirely. A small detail said everything. The television schedule decided the evening, dinner waited, conversations paused, and time slowed to match the program. By today's standards, this would feel impossible, But at the time, no one questioned it. The room quietly held us, and something familiar began to shift in the background. The season stood apart from ordinary time. Christmas in the 1970s did not blend into the rest of the year. It stood apart in a quiet but firm way. Streets looked the same, jobs continued, bills still arrived, but the pace underneath everything slowed just enough to be noticed. It felt natural, but that feeling came from a shared agreement people never talked about. Stores closed earlier, routines bent, and no one expected full attention or full productivity during that stretch. There was a small detail that said everything. Even everyday worries were spoken more softly, as if they could wait until January. Time did not stop, it loosened, creating space for sitting still without explanation. At the time, no one realized what this was building. The days carried a different weight, familiar yet slightly lighter, and the year moved forward quietly while something shifted just out of view. Decorating the home and the Christmas tree. Most homes in the 1970s did not decorate early, and that absence mattered as much as the decorations themselves. Trees came inside only days before Christmas, and they were real and imperfect and heavy with the smell of pine. It felt ordinary, but that ordinariness came from very specific limits. Decorations were reused year after year because stores closed earlier and choices were fewer. There was a small detail that said everything. Lights grew warm to the touch, and ornaments carried scratches from past winters. Families decorated together because there was no reason to rush and nowhere else to be. The tree stood quietly in the corner, changing the room without demanding attention. As nights passed, the glow felt steadier, while something subtle continued to move slowly in the background. Neighborhoods that glowed together. Rows of houses lit up one by one after sunset. The glow came from windows rather than screens, and it spilled softly onto the sidewalk. Few people noticed it, but it shaped daily life. Decorations followed no contest or deadline because neighbors worked from similar schedules and habits. It felt shared, but that feeling depended on people being home at the same time each evening. Children walked freely between houses, and adults spoke across driveways without urgency. Lights were modest and often mismatched, yet they felt connected. There was no sense of performance, only recognition. You knew who lived where by the sound of their door or their laughter. As December moved on, the streets stayed familiar while the atmosphere shifted quietly in the background. Television, music, and shared traditions. By today's standards, it would feel impossible for everyone to watch the same thing at the same time. Back then, television pulled families into the same room without effort. Music came from radios and record players and stayed on longer than intended. But that was just the surface. The shared experience existed because there were fewer channels and fixed schedules that shaped evenings. Specials aired once, and missing them meant waiting another year. Songs repeated not because they were trending, but because they were available. There was a quiet trust in letting the night unfold as planned. No one paused or rewound. The room stayed still while voices and melodies filled the space, and something familiar continued to drift slowly in the background. Food, cookies, and community. There was a quiet comfort in the smell of baking that seemed to move through the neighborhood without effort. Kitchens stayed warm longer and doors opened more often than usual. It felt generous, but that generosity came from something very specific. Recipes were simple and portions were meant to be shared because ingredients were bought with intention and time was not rushed. There was a small detail that said everything. Plates were returned with different cookies than they arrived with. People talked while standing rather than sitting because visits were not meant to last too long. Nothing felt scheduled, and yet it happened every year. The food mattered less than the movement around it. As days passed, the rhythm held steady while the season shifted quietly in the background. Christmas morning and family gatherings. The house went quiet. Then, slowly, it filled again. Christmas morning did not begin with alarms or notifications. It unfolded room by room as people woke naturally. It looked relaxed, but that ease came from a shared agreement to stay put. Stores were closed and travel was limited, which kept families together longer than planned. There was a small moment before gifts were opened that held everything still. Wrapping paper was thick and took time to remove. Conversations wandered and pauses were not filled. Meals stretched across hours without urgency. The day did not peak quickly. It settled in. As evening approached, the house felt unchanged, and yet something subtle continued to move slowly in the background. The lasting memory of 1970s Christmas. So, why does it stay with us in this particular way even now? The memories are not louder or brighter than others. They are steadier. But that was only part of the story. What lasted was built from limits that created space rather than filling it. There were fewer choices and fewer interruptions, which allowed moments to stretch naturally. Time was not optimized and feelings were not documented. The season passed without needing to be preserved. I remember realizing much later that nothing dramatic happened at all. Everything stayed familiar while meaning gathered quietly around it. And even now, that memory lingers slowly in the background, waiting without asking to be named. Now you know what people rarely say about Christmas in the 1970s and why it stayed with us. If this felt familiar, stay with the story on screen now, where we step further back to see how Christmas looked half a century ago and why those earlier years shaped everything that followed with even greater clarity. If this journey resonated, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your own memories in the comments below. Your stories matter here, and they help keep these moments alive. Thank you for spending this time remembering together. Until next time, take care, and I will see you again soon.